For DC to find success should be really easy considering the catalog of characters they have to work with. I mean, they've got Batman, Superman, Flash, Wonder Woman. They have arguably the most iconic gallery of heroes since the Greek gods of Olympus, yet for some reason, DC Studios can't really seem to find its footing when it comes to creating comics, creating movies or TV shows or anything else, which I think is why so many people were so enamored with the Batman movie when it came out earlier this year. So this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but I actually have a problem with this movie and don't think it's as good as a lot of people maybe think it is. But to do so, we're going to go ahead and review the movie. We're going to talk about it, so there will be spoilers. One of the reasons I waited so long to make this video was I wanted to make sure anybody who wanted to see it could have seen it before I just go ahead and talk about the movie in detail. So, that being said, let's go ahead and talk about The Batman. So, this is really more of a Detective Comics adaptation than it is a Batman comic adaptation, in the sense that Batman's core title tends to be just him fighting his villains, a lot more action-oriented stories, whereas Detective Comics I always felt kind of slowed things down and really just focused on Batman as a detective and a crime solver. So a bit more low-key in its storytelling, but a bit more thoughtful and takes a bit more time with its narratives. At least that's when they're doing Detective Comics at its best. So that being said, this felt more like a Detective Comics to me, whereas, say, the Christian Bale movies, the Christopher Nolan trilogy, would be more Batman. So this sees Robert Pattinson step into the role of the Caped Crusader, and this is definitely a different Batman than we're used to. He's in the second year of his career, and as you can see in this picture, his suit is more practical. This reminds me a lot of the Arkham City and Arkham Knight's game, which are games that I really enjoy, and I do like the aesthetic of how Batman looks in that, and this reminds me a lot of his Arkham costume. So he's about 2 years into his career when Gotham City starts being hit by a crime spree by a very sinister, very ruthless and murderous Riddler. So this isn't the Riddler we're used to with the bowler hat and the fun games. This is a very visceral, very calculating killer of a character who uses riddles to try to expose the dark underbelly of what he sees is going on in Gotham City while committing horrific crimes at the same time. So Batman forms an uneasy alliance with Catwoman because, being this new in his career, Batman hasn't quite got that knowledge of the underworld where he can just navigate it like a fish swims through water yet. So Selina Kyle is already in this world, and she is investigating one of her friends who is working at the Iceberg Lounge Penguins nightclub and has gone missing. So her and Batman cross paths and have similar motivations, at least trying to investigate the disappearance of Selina's friend, and Riddler, who seems to be targeting not only the political elite of Gotham City, but seemingly hinting towards the criminal element as well. So this leads them to Penguin and other criminals in Gotham City as they try to piece together and follow Riddler's clues, as kind of leading them by the hand through his motives and his crimes. And this leads Batman ultimately to Carmine Falcone. And Carmine Falcone is ultimately revealed as the center point of what Riddler is trying to expose in Gotham City, which is that Carmine Falcone pretty much controls everything, and that something went down fairly recently where the police, the judges, the politicians, everybody ended up bending to Carmine Falcone's will, and even Bruce Wayne's family has ties and possibly rose to prominence with a lot of help from Carmine Falcone. As Batman looked into this, he found out that that's not quite true, that really what happened was Carmine owed the Waynes a favor because Bruce Wayne's father, as a doctor, saved Carmine Falcone from a bullet wound, and he ended up enlisting Carmine's help, but then ended up calling that favor back because he didn't like the way Carmine was going to fulfill it. So ultimately, the Riddler exposes everything in the city that he wants to expose, and he gets Batman and the police to arrest Carmine Falcone and bring him to a vantage point where he has a sniper rifle and is able to shoot and kill Carmine, at which case Batman is able to figure out where the Riddler is, but by the time he gets there, the Riddler's gone, and they find him just kind of sitting in a cafe eating or drinking a cup of coffee, and he ultimately just turns himself in and goes to prison. And this isn't the end of the Riddler's plan. This is just another phase of it. He is revealed. He reveals that he has another one last riddle, whereas he's going to teach the city a lesson or bring a reckoning. And Batman goes back to his apartment, can't figure out the last riddle, but luckily there's a police officer there that recognizes that one of the murder weapons is actually a tool used in carpet installation. And so once Batman has that bit of information, he peels back the carpet in Riddler's apartment, finds the clue to his last riddle, which is basically that Riddler has an online community of Riddler wannabes, and he wants them all to converge on the Gotham City like basketball or hockey arena, because he's going to blow up the seawalls around Gotham City and flood a good chunk of the city, forcing everybody to seek refuge in the arena, in which case these Riddler cosplayers that are all online are going to descend and attack the citizens and the mayor and everybody else. And so that happens. Seawalls get blown up. The Riddler wannabes converge on the downtown arena. Batman manages to come down and kind of fights them off and ultimately saves the people from being killed by the Riddler thugs. And that's pretty much it. That's the premise of the Batman minus some details. So, but this is enough to really get into my premise of the movie. Now, first, we can talk about the good of the movie. I liked the performances. I liked the look of the movie. The casting was really, really done well. They really worked hard to make Gotham City feel unique, which was one of the few issues I had with the Christopher Nolan series. Was Gotham City really just looked like any other city. Same with Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey. I couldn't delineate Gotham City from, say, Pittsburgh or New York or Philadelphia or any other major metropolitan city, whereas Gotham is really supposed to have a unique look. And I feel like Matt Reeves and the Batman really went to give Gotham that look, that seedy, dark mix of old Gothic cathedral-like buildings and new modern buildings. It really did feel like its own city, and it really did feel like we were in Gotham City. And a lot of people like to point to how violent this Batman movie was, and it certainly was. It was a lot more violent. And this movie does borrow from The Long Halloween quite a bit, which if you're going to borrow from a Batman to a story to adapt a movie, The Long Halloween is about as good as it gets. So ultimately, Selina Kyle, her connection to this whole thing is revealed that she's Carmine Falcone's illegitimate daughter that he had with, I think in this one, she was either a nightclub worker or a prostitute. I honestly can't remember, but Carmine is Selina's father, and that's the connection between her, which brings her into this whole investigation that Batman was in the middle of. Now, we don't have the rest of Carmine's family in here, his son, the puzzle maker, or the big brutish linebacker daughter of his, which is a shame because those were really good characters. And I almost kind of wish they would have delved more into The Long Halloween and brought more of those elements forward. But they brought enough to make it familiar and give us a good callback. And I think ultimately they're setting up other storylines. So that being said, let's move on to my problems with the movie. So first of all, Batman himself. Yes, he is more brutal. He is more violent. I understand that he is supposed to be pretty new in his career. And I really feel that they borrowed a lot from the Netflix Daredevil series, and they're putting Batman together as far as how he looks, how he acts, the crime fighting scenes, all of that. It's all very Netflix Daredevil. But my problem is Batman is completely ineffective against the Riddler. And if you've seen this movie and you don't agree with my assertion, I want to run through this real quick. Let's run through Batman and the Riddler's entire conflict. So Riddler is got the city in a grip of terror. He's leading Batman around by the clues. Batman is kind of keeping up with him. He's solving these riddles as they're coming, but he's not saving anybody. Riddler is accomplishing everything that he wants to accomplish. Batman just happens to kind of be along for the ride and see the results of what Riddler's trying to do. And Riddler's really calling the shots and controlling the pace of what Batman is trying to do. And which is fine throughout the movie, but ultimately, when it comes time for Batman to overcome the Riddler, he walks Carmine Falcone out to a streetlight where the Riddler's clue was bring Carmine into the light. He wanted him under this certain spot because that's where he had a clean shot. He kills Carmine Falcone. Batman runs up to his apartment. Riddler's gone, and he ultimately just turns himself in. Batman doesn't even bring him down. Riddler just turns himself into the police, and then he has one last riddle. Batman can't solve it in time. Riddler does achieve his goal in blowing up the seawall. Riddler does have his army converge on this auditorium and cause all the havoc he wants to cause. He wanted to shoot the mayor, which ultimately happens. It's just they didn't fatally kill her. So I don't understand how Batman had any kind of victory here. Riddler's incarcerated because Riddler chose to be incarcerated. Riddler killed everybody he wanted to kill. He exposed everything he wanted to expose, and he flooded the city exactly how he wanted. He brought about his reckoning. And if this is the start of a Batman series and our version of Batman can't even handle the Riddler, I mean, where are we going here? What's going to happen when Two-Face and Joker and Bane show up? I mean, is he just going to be able to rise to the challenge? Are we going to give Batman that many extra credit points between now and then? Or are we going to dumb down the villains to meet this Batman? Or is it always going to be this? Is it always going to be a villain shows up, he has a grand masterful plan, Batman's kind of along for the ride, then ultimately the villain's his own undoing. So I really didn't like this. As a fan of Batman, I feel like Batman should come out on top because he outthinks or outfights or outmaneuvers his enemy. Like, for example, the end of the movie I think would have been maybe a bit better if Batman would have figured out the bring him into the light clue just in time to save Carmine Falcone from getting shot, and maybe throws a batarang up into the window and knocks the sniper rifle out of Riddler's hand and wounds him so Batman can grapple up and get him. That would have been a more satisfying ending. And you still could have had he has his other half of his plan where he's going to blow up the seawall. But at least Batman is the one that stops the Riddler. And maybe Batman goes and has enough time to disable a few of the bombs, but one still goes off, and you still have the confrontation at the auditorium. I don't know. I think that would have been better. I would have enjoyed that ending more. And that one fact sours this movie so much for me that I have a hard time overlooking it to see the good, because ultimately the main struggle is him and Riddler kind of wins, and that really bothered me. There was another undercurrent to this movie, or undertone, which is a lot of people asking, is Batman just as bad as the criminals he brings in? So there's a lot of scenes in the movie where people are saying that to him. The new mayor talks to him as Bruce Wayne and says, hey, you're not really doing anything in the city, whereas your family has always been very philanthropic with its charity giving and its money, and you really don't do anything, because ultimately he is, in his way, serving the city as Batman. But they make other comments how the crime rate really hasn't changed since Batman's showed up. And there's even a scene where he's fighting some Joker thugs, and one of them asks who he is, and he says, I am vengeance. And then at the end of the movie, he brings down one of the online Riddler cosplayers, and he asks him what his name is, and that guy says, I am vengeance. And Batman has this epitome, oh my God, I am just as bad as the criminals I brought in. I'm not doing the city any good, just being a crime fighter, being this one-man army. I need to, work with the authorities and rein myself into the powers that be. And ultimately, Batman kind of has this weird baptism moment where he saves everybody that's in this flooded auditorium, where he intercepts a power cable that's going to fall into the water and electrocute everybody. But in doing so, he plummets into this water, but then he rises up again, and he lights a bunch of flares, bringing himself into the light and like ushering people following him out of this darkness into the light on top of the auditorium. And it's very artsy, and it's very, I don't know. I didn't like it, because I didn't like that we're equating Batman to the criminals, and we're saying that Batman's not really doing any good in Gotham City. That's kind of the conclusion that the movie reaches. And this idea was explored in the Batman the Animated Series. There's an episode called Trial where a district attorney shows up in Gotham City and has this thought process where she thinks Batman is actually not only as bad as the criminals he brings in, but is ultimately the root cause of the supervillains that he fights. And so the criminals in Arkham throw a riot. They take over the asylum. They capture Batman. They kidnap that attorney, that district attorney who believes that. And they form a jury of Batman's peers, which are his enemy, his villains. Joker is the judge. Two-Face is the prosecutor. And they tell this district attorney that she needs to defend Batman against the rogues gallery, who are accusing him of being their cause, being the cause of all of their reason they all turned evil. And so she ends up having to argue the other side, argue in favor for Batman. And as she kind of explores his rogues gallery, explores their motivations and what makes them tick, she realizes that they would have been this without Batman's intervention, and that Batman has actually been the wall that separates them from the rest of the city, and actually has done a service to Gotham City is doing this. So they ask the same question, but they come to the conclusion that no, Batman is better than the criminals that he brings in, and yes, Batman is good for the city. And it's just a better resolution. That's the character. It's almost like the movie just hates Batman. So I don't understand, as a Batman fan, how you're going to watch it and think it's this great piece of cinema, this great bit of Batman storytelling, when the movie in every single way kind of craps all over Batman. First, he can't defeat the Riddler, one of his, ultimately one of his better known but still kind of B-list villains, and he is unable to defeat him. And then they just kind of ask the question, well, what's even the point of you? Are you even any good? And the answer they come up with is not really. So these are the problems I have with Batman, and I know this is probably going to make me fairly unpopular with a lot of you, but I really want to know what you think. So let's talk about it in the comments below. I mean, what did you think of the Batman? I know the vast majority of people love it. We're doing this video now because I just read that it just crossed $100 million in the overseas market, and that's great. I like that comic book movies do well, and I think this movie did do a lot of things right that they can build on. But this particular direction of kind of making Batman getting the short end of everything, I didn't care for it. They planted a lot of seeds for like Court of Owls storylines and stuff like that, and I really would like to see that adapted, and I would like to see this tone continued for the Batman movies, but I would like to see Batman more the hero of this story than just kind of a character in it. And ultimately, even the question of is he even doing any good? Can one man even make a difference? And that answer being no. I did not like that. I didn't care for it at all. And maybe you guys saw it differently. Maybe you didn't get that conclusion from what the movie was presenting. So let's talk about it in the comments below. Let me have it. Tell me how misguided I am on my opinions, because every time I've had the conversation with my friends and everyone tells me how much they love the Batman, and I bring this up, the first thing they tell me is that I'm crazy for hating the movie, but then when I tell them why, they can't really rebut anything that I'm saying. Ultimately, this is a Batman movie where the Riddler wins. The Riddler just beat him. And how is that a good Batman story? Tell me in the comments below. While you're down there, please hit like and subscribe. And please comment on this video. It really helps get this out in front of more people. And I want to get a lot of people's opinions on this. I really want to know what you think. So let's talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and end the video because I want to get this conversation started. And I will talk to you on the next one. I appreciate all you guys, and thanks so much for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.